Today, we're diving into a Japanese suspense thriller. The film begins with a man curled up under a bed, watching the barefoot lady of the house walk around in slippers. He obsessively presses his face to the floor, as if he could feel the lady's delicate feet and the lily fragrance emanating from her body. Then, the man of the house enters and pushes the lady onto the bed. The man under the bed watches their clothes fall piece by piece and listens to their passionate sounds. Trembling, he presses his hand against the bottom of the bed, as if he could feel the lady's body heat. This man is named Mitsui, and the lady of the house is named Chihiro Sasaki. Mitsui has always been an extremely inconspicuous person. When he was a child, his father once forgot him in the car, and he almost suffocated. Later, in school, he was always the one forgotten by his classmates. For instance, during the graduation photo shoot, even the absent students were photoshopped into the picture, but he who was present was ignored and could only watch from afar. Thus, loneliness was his only companion growing up. In a bustling world, he was like an isolated island, with no one caring whether he truly existed, including his teachers and parents. No one cared whether he really existed, not even his teachers or parents. It wasn't until he got to college on a sunny day that things changed. During a class, the teacher called on Mitsui. Startled, Mitsui stood up nervously, unsure of how to respond. At that moment, Chihiro Sasaki, who was sitting behind him, quietly called his name and handed him the answer, helping him out of his awkward situation. Little did the pure and lovely Chihiro know that this simple act of calling Mitsui's name would bind their fates together. Years later, she would be saved by him, and he would be redeemed by her. In Mitsui's over 20 years of student life, she was the first to call him by his name. After class that day, Mitsui mustered up the courage to ask Chihiro Sasaki out for coffee. Chihiro was a bit surprised but responded with a bright smile, happily accepting his invitation. Mitsui nervously followed her, catching faint whiffs of her lily fragrance, feeling both anxious and secretly delighted. At the cafe, Chihiro ordered 2 cups of mantling coffee, a flavor she really liked, which Mitsui quietly noted. But they were from completely different worlds. Chihiro happily talked to Mitsui about school clubs, but Mitsui, who had no social skills, couldn't keep up with the conversation. Realizing that Mitsui had been silent with his head down, Chihiro felt a bit awkward and changed the topic. It seems Mitsui doesn't like to talk. Do you have any hobbies? Mitsui looked up and told Sasaki Chihiro, "Guppies. I raise guppies." Sasaki Chihiro smiled and said she knew nothing about them and asked him to introduce them to her. Mitsui then started talking endlessly about guppies. Chihiro seemed very interested, nodding continuously and expressing her desire to raise one too. Mitsui excitedly told her, "I'll pick the most beautiful one for you." Chihiro happily gave him her phone number and address, and they agreed that Mitsui would bring the fish to her house next Thursday at 10. The scene shifts back to the present. As the saying goes, time flows like water, and 11 years have passed. Mitsui and Chihiro no longer have any connection. Mitsui remains silent and solitary, living alone and enjoying fishkeeping. Occasionally, he brews a pot of mantling coffee and quietly watches the guppies in his aquarium. In these moments, his thoughts often drift back to 11 years ago, to a sunny afternoon when a sweet and lovely girl softly called him Mitsui-kun. His longing has not diminished with time. Instead, it has grown stronger. On a rainy afternoon, Mitsui decided to find Chihiro. He didn't want to disturb her life, just to see her briefly. He hoped that in the moment they passed by each other, this woman who haunted his dreams would recognize him with surprise and call him Mitsui. After much investigation, Mitsui found Sasaki Chihiro's current address. Chihiro is now married to a civil servant named Kenta Hamazaki and has a 1-year-old daughter. Her life seems beautiful and happy. Early that morning, Mitsui came alone to Chihiro's house, waiting for her to come out. He tried hard to suppress his inner excitement, imagining what their reunion would be like. Maybe he would hear her call him Mitsui again. However, when they passed by each other, Chihiro didn't recognize him. Mitsui was very disappointed. It turned out he was so insignificant that no one would remember him. He was about to leave in disappointment, but suddenly turned back. Mitsui looked puzzled at Chihiro Sasaki's departing figure. She should be very happy now, so why does she look so troubled? Her eyes are dull, no longer sparkling like they did 11 years ago. The faint lily scent he always cherished is also gone. What has turned her from a cheerful girl into this? Mitsui decided to stay and find out what had happened to Chihiro. He rented a 3-story shop near Chihiro's house. The first and second floors were turned into an aquarium, and he lived on the 3rd floor. He put up pictures of Chihiro on the walls of the 3rd floor and bought a plastic mannequin. He dressed the mannequin to look like Chihiro Sasaki and sprayed it with lily-scented perfume. He stared at the mannequin, and for a moment, it seemed to come to life and turn into Chihiro Sasaki. With a blank expression, she said to Mitsui, "Mitsui-kun." In this fleeting illusion, Mitsui's thoughts drifted back to 11 years ago. 11 years ago, he brought a carefully selected guppy for Chihiro. Chihiro Sasaki, wearing a blue dress, happily welcomed him into her home. The two of them fiddled with the aquarium setup together. By accident, Mitsui's arm brushed against Chihiro's body. It was a warmth Mitsui had never felt before. He gazed at the seemingly unaware Chihiro, his heart filled with countless emotions. Chihiro Sasaki smiled and said, "Mitsui, can you come over often? I'm not good at taking care of the fish, so could you help me when you have time?" Mitsui, suppressing his excitement, agreed. The scene shifts back to the present. Mitsui is spying on Chihiro Sasaki's house with a telescope. This is the most important part of his day. He has figured out all of Chihiro's daily activities. Occasionally, when he sees her bathing, he excitedly presses the shutter to capture the moment. Then, he sprays lily-scented perfume on a model, brews a pot of mantling coffee, closes his eyes, and imagines Chihiro Sasaki is right beside him, gently calling him Mitsui-kun. On this day, Mitsui discovered something terrifying through his telescope. It seemed that Sasaki Chihiro's husband, Hamazaki Kentaro, was furious because the food was not tasty. He poured hot soup on Chihiro's face, then pushed her down and kicked her hard. After that, he pulled the curtains shut. Mitsui couldn't see what happened next and was shocked. He never expected the seemingly gentle Hamazaki Kentaro to be such a brute. It turned out that Sasaki Chihiro had transformed from a cheerful and lovely girl into her current lifeless state due to her husband's long-term domestic violence. The next day, worried about Chihiro, Mitsui secretly watched outside her house. He saw Chihiro Sasaki acting as if nothing had happened, gently and thoughtfully sending Kentaro Hamazaki off to work. Mitsui began to doubt if what he saw yesterday was just his imagination. However, the next moment, Chihiro turned around, and he saw the bruise on her left eye. This confirmed that everything that happened last night was real. Mitsui immediately went home and found the photos he secretly took of Chihiro while she was bathing. He noticed that her body still had some bruises. Mitsui didn't know what to do. He wanted to save his goddess, but lacked the courage. So, he decided to send Chihiro a bouquet of lilies on the 10th of every month, hoping it would make her a bit happier. However, Chihiro threw all the lilies away. Mitsui replaced all the guppies in his aquarium shop with the descendants of the one he had given Chihiro back then. He hoped that by doing this, she would notice and remember him, creating a chance for them to meet again. On this day, Chihiro Sasaki indeed came. She looked at the guppies in the fish tank and showed a long-lost smile. She asked Mitsui with a smile if it would be difficult for a layperson to raise guppies. Mitsui said he could give her a few as part of the opening promotion and even offered her an old set of fish-keeping equipment. She just needed to come here to buy fish food in the future. Chihiro Sasaki was very surprised and thanked him repeatedly. In fact, Mitsui had prepared all of this especially for her. Mitsui brought the fish and the tank to Chihiro Sasaki's home and helped her set it up. He watched her happiness, a scene reminiscent of 11 years ago. That morning, the two of them were just like this. The unintentional touch of warmth bound him tightly with feelings. Suddenly, Chihiro Sasaki seemed to remember something and hurried to the kitchen to get a bag of fruit to thank Mitsui. Mitsui accepted it with a smile. But just as Chihiro went into the kitchen, Mitsui took the opportunity to steal her key. He went home and immediately made an identical copy of it. Then, he quietly put the stolen key back. In the dark, Mitsui muttered to himself, "If someone asked me if I liked Chihiro Sasaki, I would definitely say yes. But if they asked if I wanted to possess her, I wouldn't know how to answer. Because I don't know how to make someone happy." A month passed like this, and it was the 10th. Mitsui still sent a bouquet of lilies to Chihiro Sasaki, but as expected, Chihiro threw them away. Later, Mitsui found an opportunity to install a bug in her house. He usually used a copied key to enter Chihiro's house every week, clean her fish tank, replace the bug's battery, and then lie on her bed, lost in his thoughts before putting on his shoes and leaving. This was his happiest time, and probably the greatest meaning of his life. One night, Kentaro Hamazaki brutally beat Chihiro Sasaki, stripped her naked, and forced her to kneel and lick his toes just because he had a bad day at work. Scars and bruises crisscrossed Chihiro's back. Perhaps because she was too obedient, Hamazaki was still not satisfied and humiliated her even more. Meanwhile, at home, Mitsui listened to the agonizing screams of his goddess through the bugging device while looking at Chihiro's photo on the wall. After releasing himself, Mitsui regained his composure. He repeatedly listened to the recording from the bugging device, feeling immense pain. He couldn't bear that his relationship with Chihiro remained at this level. He wanted to truly love and protect her, but didn't know how. Another day, Chihiro Sasaki visited the aquarium. Mitsui made her a cup of mantling coffee. Chihiro happily said it was her favorite coffee. Mitsui was very pleased. She had said the same thing 11 years ago. Watching Chihiro's departing figure, his desire grew even stronger. He realized he was completely captivated by this woman. He couldn't leave her for a moment, so he made a decision to sneak into Chihiro's house and hide under her bed, the closest place to her. Here, he could feel Chihiro's breath and everything about her. However, that day, Kentaro Banzaki discovered the flowers he had sent to Chihiro. Furious, he brutally beats Chihiro and throws her into the bathtub. Watching his beloved woman being abused by the cruel Banzaki, the cowardly Mitsui wants to rush out and save her, but he lacks the courage and can only hope Banzaki stops soon. Exhausted from the beating, Banzaki Kentaro returns to bed and falls asleep. Chihiro, also unconscious, is left in the bathtub. Hearing Banzaki's snores from under the bed, Mitsui quickly runs to the bathroom, pulls the unconscious Chihiro out of the tub, dries her off, and holds her tightly, warming her cold body with his own. After a night passed, Chihiro woke up to find herself lying on the living room carpet, covered with a blanket. She was puzzled because her last memory was fainting in the bathtub. How did she end up here? Her husband would never be so considerate. Could there be someone else in the room? Due to years of domestic violence from her husband, her mental state had started to deteriorate, often leaving her in a daze. She looked around the empty room and murmured, "Is anyone there? If someone is there, please come out and save me." However, there was no response. The scene shifts to 11 years ago. One day, Chihiro Sasaki finds Mitsui and tells him she can no longer keep guppies. Mitsui, noticing the injuries on Chihiro's face, asks why. Chihiro fearfully explains that her boyfriend won't allow it. Before she can finish, her boyfriend angrily rushes over, grabs her, and beats Mitsui. He then raises his fist to hit Chihiro. Hearing Chihiro's screams, Mitsui, in a moment of resolve, grabs the heater rod from the fish tank, removes the anti-shock cover, and electrocutes Chihiro's boyfriend. He then beats him up. After dealing with Chihiro's boyfriend, the two sit dazed on the carpet. Mitsui hugs Chihiro and reassures her that everything is okay. The dimly lit room is filled with their sweetness and passion. The scene shifts, and Sen opens his eyes, bringing the timeline back to the present. He looks at the photo of Chihiro Sasaki on the wall and makes up his mind to save her, just like he did 11 years ago. So, he buys a stun gun and sneaks into Chihiro's house again. Meanwhile, Chihiro Sasaki receives a call from her mother, who tells her that her father is hospitalized with cancer and wants her to visit him. During dinner, Chihiro timidly asks Kenta Hamazaki if she can go see her father. However, Hamazaki coldly refuses, saying that whether she goes or not, the old man will die, so there's no point in her going. Enraged, Chihiro slaps him hard. Hamazaki is momentarily stunned but then becomes furious, stabbing Chihiro's hand with a fork. He then drags her to the bedroom and slaps her repeatedly until her mouth is full of blood. Mitsui, hiding in the shadows with a stun baton, watched everything unfold but didn't dare to act. He could only watch helplessly as his beloved was brutally tortured and humiliated. Back home, Mitsui was in agony, hating his own cowardice but not knowing what to do. He tore up Chihiro's photos and smashed the model. Memories of the past flooded his mind. Hating his own weakness, he gritted his teeth and shocked himself with the stun baton. Under the electric shock, Mitsui collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain as memories came rushing back. 11 years ago, he eagerly chose a guppy and went to Chihiro's place. However, Chihiro called him and said, "Sorry, I can't keep fish in my apartment. I'm really sorry." On the phone, Chihiro kept apologizing for not being able to keep the fish. And so, 11 years ago, Mitsui and Chihiro's story ended abruptly here. Everything that happened afterward was just Mitsui's imagination. The only real interaction they had was sharing a cup of coffee. Chihiro had long forgotten about that afternoon coffee date, but Mitsui never did. Chihiro was the only one who called him by his name, and he would never forget the words Mitsui-kun. The timeline returns to the present. A remorseful Mitsui resolutely takes out a stun baton and shuts down the aquarium. He sneaks into Chihiro's house once more, determined to end everything this time, saving his beloved and redeeming himself. Meanwhile, Chihiro realized she could no longer endure her current life. She decided to escape with her child while Kentaro Hamazaki was at work. Finding a hotel to stay in, Chihiro made herself a cup of mantling coffee, feeling at ease. She thought, so it's this easy to escape the nightmare. She began to look forward to her new life. However, she suddenly discovered a bug in her lighter. Could it be that someone has been in her house all along? That night, someone covering her with a blanket wasn't just an illusion? Then, the door was pushed open, and an enraged Kentaro Hamazaki walked in. The scene shifts to Kenta Hamazaki bringing Chihiro Sasaki back home, preparing to give her a good scolding. Chihiro, holding a knife, cries out and tells Hamazaki that she must leave him. Hamazaki, very angry, snatches the knife away and pins her down, cursing her through gritted teeth. Chihiro, terrified, struggles desperately to escape. Suddenly, she thinks of something. There might be another person in this house. She immediately shouts, "Are you there? Are you there? If you hear me, come out and save me." Mitsui, who is hesitating in the dark, suddenly realizes what he must do. He rushed out and stunned Kentaro Hamazaki. Chihiro looked blankly at this strange man. She had no impression of the man who saved her, only a vague feeling that she had seen him somewhere before. She timidly asked, "Who are you?" Mitsui coldly replied, "It doesn't matter if I tell you my name. You will forget me. I'm just a man who had a cup of coffee with you 11 years ago." Chihiro didn't quite understand. She glanced at the unconscious Hamazaki and immediately lunged to strangle him. Mitsui grabbed her hand, signaling her not to do it. Then he went over and did what Chihiro wanted to do, resolutely ending Hamazaki's life. He loves her so much that he is willing to sacrifice everything for Chihiro's happiness. He didn't come to this world because of Chihiro, but he became more attached to it because of her. At the end of the film, Mitsui turns himself into the police and confesses everything. At this moment, Chihiro runs over and shouts loudly, "Mitsui-kun." Mitsui turns around, his eyes full of relief. Hearing this phrase again after 11 years, Mitsui-kun fills his heart with warmth, melting away the loneliness of 40 years. Mitsui is in tears. Chihiro, tormented by an unhappy marriage, gazes at the man willing to give everything for her, tears welling up in her eyes. She had gone to Mitsui's rented room and saw photos of herself on the wall, including their university graduation photo. Only then did she remember Mitsui, the classmate with whom she had only shared a cup of coffee. The film ends with a question. In some corner of this world, is there someone who loves you so deeply, who feels all your happiness and all your sorrow, willing to give everything for you, even their life, while you remain unaware?
前を呼ばれたことは一度もなかった。いや、大学だけ。